Alright. I'll talk about the Rani. Classic Doctor Who time, and as selected by my patrons, I will be talking about Time and the Rani. So, the timing worked out pretty well because when I talked about characters from the classic series that have not been brought into New Who I think should, I made a point of saying the Rani was not on that list, which prompted several people to ask, why not? Well, this will give me an opportunity to say why not. But before we get into her specifically, let's talk the broad strokes of this story. I'll try to avoid spoilers, but I'll probably talk them eventually, but I'll be avoiding them for now at least. So this is the first outing of the seventh Doctor, Sylvester McCoy. This is his inaugural adventure. So it's him. The companion of the time was Mel. This is the first time I've encountered her. And then, of course, we have Kate O'Mara as the Rani. This is the Rani's second appearance in the show as well. Also her last, I believe. So what we have is things kick off. We don't really get a proper regeneration on this. They kind of couldn't because Colin Baker didn't come back to just be killed off in the opening scene. And I can't really say I blame him for that. He really got shafted in this whole experience when he was on the TV show. I'm really glad he got redemption on the audios. But what happens, it opens with the TARDIS just kind of getting knocked around, and we only see the sixth Doctor from behind because it's Sylvester McCoy in a blonde wig, and they flip him over and he basically regenerates right there, and now we have Sylvester McCoy. So we're coming into this with it being his first time, and he actually works surprisingly well for his first outing, and that was interesting for me because I generally like later Sylvester McCoy more than I like early Sylvester McCoy, because they kind of I think they were very much initially trying to counteract the harshness of Colin Baker's Doctor with someone a little more goofy, silly, and Sylvester McCoy at this point is kind of doing that, but it's working for me. I think there's just an energy and a charm to his performance, even at this point, doing the version of the seventh Doctor who I like less. But I also maybe part of the reason I'm more accepting of it in this instance is I kind of give not a total free pass, but like I give a longer leash to the first story of any given Doctor, because post-regeneration wonkiness, they're allowed to be a little weird, or in the case of Tom Baker, just weirder than they might play it later. So maybe that's part of why it's working for me here, but I like how rapidly he's talking and he's bouncing off of everybody. I kind of like his frequent misquotings of things, and his mix and matching of metaphors and popular sayings. I actually rather enjoyed that. It's not something I needed to keep seeing past this episode, but for the purposes of this, especially knowing he's coming off a regeneration, it made sense to me, and I kind of enjoyed that. I mentioned Mel. This is my first outing with Mel, and I don't really know if I can judge her as a character at all, because the only overriding memory I have of her is that she screams a lot in this. And first of all, she's got a real unpleasant scream. I mean, and that's a weird criticism. Screams aren't supposed to be pleasant, and this wouldn't even be a problem if she wasn't screaming so much. Holy God. So, and she looks ridiculous. I mean, it's the 80s, so yeah, she looks ridiculous. The Rani looks ridiculous too, but we'll get to her. So she just doesn't work. I get very little from her as a character, and she really doesn't work functionally in the story. She essentially has no function in the story. Like, she does nothing except get captured, almost get captured, scream, 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 scream. She contributes nothing to the plot of this thing. There was actually a surprisingly high production value on this, a lot higher than I was expecting. The last episode I saw that was anywhere near this era was I think the Twin Dilemma, and the production design on that one, the production value was real low. So I was quite surprised. There's some cool sets. The Rani's lab is kind of typical, but it's fine. There's sort of this leisure, I think they call it the Leisure Palace. I forget exactly what they call it, but it's actually a really cool design, and it's suitably kind of alien. Like, boy, this place looks a little weird, so that's a really cool set. The makeup for basically, so I kind of wandered off the plot. So where the Doctor and Mel end up, the Rani is running experiments with what is called strange matter, and I looked it up. That is a real thing, and I'm really glad. While watching, I was like, I'm going to look it up and hope that's real, because if that's what they think they can get away with calling stuff, oh boy, please be real, so I know that there's an excuse for it. And it is. Strange matter is a real thing. But she's conducting experiments. There's this strange matter asteroid. And the Rani's whole deal, if you haven't seen this and don't know who she is that she is a rogue Time Lord, a bit like the Master. But her whole thing is she is always in pursuit of these scientific advancements and running experiments with absolutely zero morals. So she has no care as far as even finding out what the collateral damage of any given experiment she's trying to run is. She just doesn't care. And I know that sounds cool, and we'll come back to it. I'll talk about my problems with her. But that's sort of her basic thing. And there are kind of two races on this planet. There is a very humanoid race with, kind of maybe little scales around here, which is, it's not an amazing design, but it gets the job done. Plus, they put them in these hats with these really cool hair things going on, so that only a fairly small amount of their face is showing. That helps sort of plaster over, the limitations of the makeup. So they're enslaved, and basically, well, they're enslaved in a weird way. She has their leader in her lab basically as her primary assistant. And the rest of them basically under threat of retribution if the leader doesn't go along with her. So that guy is actually a really fascinating character. As you can tell, he's going through a struggle of trying to find the balance of, I know that what I am doing for the Rani is a bad thing. I am helping her do a bad thing, but what she will do to my people is way, 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 way worse. Or at least I believe that it will be. So watching that struggle and the way in which he kind of tries to thread that needle, like telling the Doctor, look, you run away, I'm not going to try and stop you, but I am still going to continue to help her because I need to. So I thought there was a surprising amount of depth in his character. But the other race that's on here is a race of just flat out minions for the Rani. They're not being coerced, so far as we know. They're just serving her, and they're sort of these weird four-eyed bat things. Now, normally when you say multiple eyes, you think multiple eyes on the face. No, they've got two eyes here, two eyes here, and one in the back of their head. And honestly, the design is pretty cool. And I also like how we they tried to visualize what it looks like for them. The fact that they're getting sensory information from 4 different directions. And that was pretty cool. The mouth movement on these things was not great. Sometimes it really didn't move in time with the speech that these things were saying at all. Even when it did, it's just a jaw on a hinge, so it's just opening and closing. You know, there's no articulation anywhere. There's no animatronics at play. And they were smart to not show it right off. I think it wasn't until the second episode. There's 4 in this story. That I don't think it was until the second episode that they actually showed it, and that was probably for the best. But again, the limitations are in the realization of the design. The design itself is kind of a neat idea, and when it doesn't have to move and try and look like it's talking, the execution of the outfit is not that bad either. Pretty good even in places. So you've got them. They are, aside from a cool look, they don't really have a lot going on. They're kind of just your generic minion race, more or less. So let's get to the Rani. Here's the things that don't work about the Rani in general and in this story in particular. Her introductory story, she was very much sort of set up to be the successor to the Master. And at least for me, that sort of puts her in bad standing already. Now, I'm not saying the Master didn't kind of need to be rehabilitated. He did. He suffered from the problem basically any villain for a long-running show who is never permitted to win has, which is that, you know, no matter how dastardly his scheme is, if he just loses every single time he shows up, he becomes harder to take as a threat. It's the reason that Cobra Commander and Skeletor and Shredder eventually seem to be used more for comedy than trying to actually be intimidated by them, because you've just watched them get defeated over and over and over and over again. You can't take them seriously anymore. And the Master was starting to suffer from that to a certain extent. But rather than try and actually resuscitate the reputation of the Master, they decided to introduce a different rogue Time Lord, and that's where we get the Rani. So, in this story, okay, so first of all, she gets a hold of the Doctor, finds out that he is just regenerated, and she induces a bit of amnesia with the goal of convincing him to work on her experiments and basically help come up with the formula she needs to do sort of the big thing that she's trying to do. But it's not enough for her to induce amnesia and then be like, I'm your friend, come help me. No, she has to actually dress up like Mel, which is, I'm sorry, it's kind of dumb. And I found myself thinking very early on, your plan and the things you're having to convince him to do are already really stretching credibility. I don't think you're gaining a lot of stable ground by looking like Mel. I think it would have made little to no difference, and you look ridiculous. So there's that. Oh, I skipped over this. There was one other thing I wanted to highlight with the effects that I actually thought was really cool. There's these booby traps in the Quarry, because of course there's always a Quarry in these things. So there are these booby traps, these tripwires, that when characters activate them, they basically get trapped in this force bubble that flies off and smacks into something and explodes. And the effect is surprisingly pretty good, and really well timed in terms of like appearing to bounce and then dirt shoots up and everything. So obviously they just rigged like a small little cannon with just to throw the dirt around, but it's all timed and integrated really well. I was actually pretty impressed by this effect, all things considered. So that was neat. But anyway, so the Rani is convincing the Doctor of stuff that is way beyond just, this whole trying to pass for Mel thing, I might have bought more if her goal was much more simplified. If it was just, I just need him to invite me back to the TARDIS. I don't even need him to buy this for very long. I just need him to buy it for long enough to let me in. If it had been something like that, I could have rolled with it, but it's not. Instead, she's going through these really elaborate motions to get him to lend his brain power to her project, which has coincidentally also involved her kidnapping the greatest minds from history to hook them into this machine. A plot point that adds absolutely nothing and goes absolutely nowhere. So you've got all that, and impersonating Mel, she looks ridiculous. And okay, here's the thing with the Rani. On paper, I dig her concept, especially the idea of someone who is so into experimenting that they don't have a lot of room for scruples, or any room for scruples. So it's like they took the scientist inventor aspect of Davros and stuck it in the Master, but it's a woman. And I think part of it comes down to the performance. Her performance is... I couldn't decide if it was inconsistent or just ill-advised, because she'll go from, obsessing over her work to being emotional in ways that don't make sense for the character as I understand her. And I'm not saying she can't get emotional. I know she's not like a robot or something, but she immediately, mocks the Doctor for being a sentimentalist. And you would think someone who was all just about the science would kind of have a cold thing going, but she gets heated, and she gets heated easily. Like, she's always looking for an excuse to insult her henchmen and her minions. And the attitude, there was an incongruity between the character on paper and the way the character is played, because on paper the character should be, and the Doctor even kind of says something to this effect, like somewhat noble, but like always pursuing these dangerous experiments that could cause a lot of damage. But she doesn't come across like a dedicated scientist. She comes across like a jock who wants to beat up the nerds and make them do her homework. She's just got this permanent inferiority complex fueled anger, or at least that's how I read it, and it makes her very uninteresting. Because again, the core concept of the character is interesting, but the way in which she's actually executed just is not. And Kate O'Mara can't do the shifts in character from sort of smirking, I think I'm winning, to anger, to smugness, to anger, to just being very manipulative of people around her, to anger. She gets angry a lot, I think I'm kind of saying, which again is something that doesn't seem to fit with what the main idea of what the character is supposed to be is. You know what? I don't think I'm going to get into spoilers really at all, because the stuff that happens at the tail end doesn't really need to be singled out. The overall plot is okay. It's functional. I'm still not entirely sure. Oh, you know what? I almost said I'm not entirely sure why the Rani's even running this particular experiment, but then I remembered what goes on in the last episode, because I didn't binge all the way through it. I did 3 and then got to the 4th one a little bit later, so I didn't quite make the connection. But here's the other thing, and this is finally what really broke me, and like, this character just doesn't work, is that, her whole premise is being about the experiments, and damn the costs, damn the cost in suffering, in life, whatever. She doesn't care. And yet she expresses that her goal is to enable something where she will be able to rule the universe. Like, that's the Master's shtick. You're now literally muscling in on his turf. And again, this sort of naked grab for power is at odds with the I just want to run my experiments, but I don't care who gets hurt by my doing them thing that she is, again, largely on paper. And I suppose if I were to be fair and look back at my video, when I said I was going to put her on the list of characters who should be brought back, I still don't think she should be, but there are probably ways that you could write her and have it work better if you really drill down to what the original concept was and work with that, because whatever we ended up with in the 80s, it just didn't work. So this whole story overall is a very mixed bag. Sylvester McCoy himself has slid into this part pretty effortlessly. Mel is really annoying. The production value is surprisingly good, especially for the time period. the villain is generic in most ways. You know, as soon as something doesn't go her way, she starts bellowing orders, and I feel like the payoff with the bat monsters was kind of dumb and weird as well, because I was expecting, because there was a moment where one of them is trying to convince the Rani to basically hook herself up to the machine she has all the other geniuses hooked up to contribute her own intellect. And the thing was, this guy had been so sycophantic that I was like, there's got to be more going on there. But it turns out I was giving the story too much credit, because there really isn't. It felt like the story set up this guy secretly trying to undermine the Rani the whole time, and her not realizing it, but it never pays that off. So, yeah, that's another thing that doesn't work. The Rani herself doesn't really work. The overall plot is just fine. So basically, we're left with better than expected production values for the era and Sylvester McCoy. And I guess the question is that enough to carry you through? If it is, go ahead and check it out. If it isn't, this is not one of the ones I would recommend to newcomers to the show, or to New Who fans who are looking for, like a viewing order of stuff to be seen from the classic era. No, I think this one, while not awful, certainly far from the worst I've seen, it's still not great. So those are my thoughts on Time and the Rani. What are yours? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's all the stuff to do, such as like and subscribe and support me on Patreon and listen to my podcast and follow me on Twitter and maybe do other things as well. I forgot all the stuff that's down in the description, but it is down there. So drop a comment, and until next time, this council is adjourned.